Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. It's the nursery rhyme we all learn as children. A neat, tidy summary of the 6 wives of Henry VIII. But this rhyme is a lie. It sanitizes a story of unimaginable horror. It turns a serial abuser into a historical caricature. And it hides the most terrifying truth of all, that marrying Henry VIII was not a lottery. It was a death sentence. Welcome to Dark Chronicles. Tonight, we conduct a thought experiment. We will place you in the shoes of Henry's wives. We will analyze the 6 different survival strategies they employed, and we will prove, step by step, why every single one of them was doomed to fail. This is not a story about 6 queens. It's a story about 6 victims of the most powerful domestic abuser in history. We will deconstruct the myth of Henry the Great and reveal the monster beneath. A narcissistic, paranoid tyrant who used his absolute power to create a system of psychological torture from which there was no escape. We will show you how he used isolation, gaslighting, and legal terror to break the will of his wives, and how he turned the English court into a golden cage where every smile was a potential betrayal and every whisper a death warrant. Before we begin this descent into royal tyranny, I want you to answer a question. Based on what you know, which of the 6 wives do you think had the best survival strategy? Write your answer in the comments below. By the end of this video, you will understand why your answer is wrong. Our experiment begins with strategy number 1, the dutiful wife. This was the strategy of Catherine of Aragon. For 24 years, she was the perfect queen. Pious, loyal, and politically astute, she gave Henry a daughter, Mary, and suffered through multiple miscarriages and stillbirths in her desperate attempt to produce a male heir. Her strategy was simple: to be the perfect, unimpeachable Catholic wife. But it failed. Why? Because Henry's narcissism was more powerful than Catherine's piety. When he became infatuated with Anne Boleyn, he didn't just want a divorce. He wanted Catherine to admit that their marriage had been a sin, that she had lived in incest for 24 years, that their daughter was a bastard. He wanted to break her spirit, to rewrite history to fit his desires. When she refused, he unleashed a campaign of psychological torture. He separated her from her daughter Mary for years. He stripped her of her title, her jewels, her servants. He exiled her to a series of damp, isolated castles where she lived in poverty and despair. Her every move was watched, her every letter intercepted. She died in 1536, alone and broken, possibly from a slow-acting poison. Her final letter to Henry was signed, Catherine the Queen. She never broke, but she did not survive. Catherine's story is the first piece of evidence in our investigation. It proves that loyalty and piety were no defense against Henry's tyranny. At Dark Chronicles, we don't just tell you what happened, we show you how it happened, and why. If you want to understand the dark psychology of power, subscribe and activate the notification bell. The real experiment begins now. This brings us to strategy number 2, the seductress. This was the strategy of Anne Boleyn. If Catherine was the perfect wife, Anne was the perfect mistress. Intelligent, ambitious, and sexually charismatic, she refused to be Henry's mistress, forcing him to break with the Catholic Church to marry her. Her strategy was to use her sexual power to control the king. For a time, it worked. She became queen and gave Henry a daughter, Elizabeth. But her power was built on a foundation of sand. It depended entirely on Henry's desire and on her ability to produce a male heir. When she failed to produce a son, and when Henry's eye began to wander to Jane Seymour, Anne's fate was sealed. Henry didn't just divorce her, he destroyed her. He accused her of adultery with 5 men, including her own brother. He accused her of witchcraft, of incest, of plotting to kill him. These were not just lies. They were weapons of psychological warfare, designed to turn the entire country against her. She was imprisoned in the Tower of London, interrogated, and psychologically tormented. Her own uncle presided over her trial. She was found guilty, of course. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Her execution was a masterpiece of cruelty. Henry, in a final act of mercy, hired a French swordsman to execute her, rather than the traditional English axe. This was not an act of kindness. It was a way to prolong her agony, to make her death a public spectacle. She was buried in an old arrow chest, in an unmarked grave. Her crime was not adultery. Her crime was failing to control the monster she had unleashed. Anne Boleyn's fall was as dramatic as her rise. Do you think she was a victim of her own ambition, or a feminist icon who dared to challenge a patriarchal system? Share your perspective in the comments. Next, strategy number 3, the submissive wife. This was the strategy of Jane Seymour. She was the opposite of Anne Boleyn in every way. Meek, gentle, and obedient, her motto was, bound to obey and serve. Her strategy was to be the perfect, submissive vessel for the king's will. And in a way, it was the most successful strategy. She gave Henry what he wanted most, a son, Edward. But the price was her life. Childbirth in the 16th century was a dangerous business, and Jane suffered a difficult labor. She contracted puerperal fever, a common and deadly postpartum infection. Henry, obsessed with his new heir, refused to allow doctors to properly treat her. He saw her as a disposable vessel. She had served her purpose. She died 12 days after giving birth. Henry gave her a queen's funeral and was eventually buried beside her. He considered her his only true wife, because she was the only one who had given him a son and then had the good grace to die before she could become a problem. Jane Seymour's story is a chilling reminder of the brutal realities of childbirth before modern medicine. Share this video to honor the memory of the millions of women who have died in childbirth throughout history. And consider this: in what ways are women still pressured to sacrifice their own health and well-being for the sake of their families? After Jane's death, Henry remained unmarried for 2 years. But the need for a political alliance led him to strategy number 4, the political pawn. This was Anne of Cleves, a German princess. She was chosen for Henry based on a flattering portrait by Hans Holbein. But when Henry met her in person, he was repulsed. He called her the Flanders mare. Their marriage was a disaster from the start. It was never consummated. But unlike Catherine of Aragon, Anne of Cleves was a pragmatist. She did not fight the divorce. She agreed to the annulment, and in return, Henry gave her a generous settlement, including several properties and the honorary title of King's beloved sister. She outlived Henry and all his other wives, dying peacefully in her 40s. So did she survive? Yes, in the most literal sense. But she survived by ceasing to be a wife. She survived by accepting public humiliation, by giving up her title, by agreeing to live a life of celibacy under Henry's watchful eye. She survived by playing the game, but she lost her identity in the process. Anne of Cleves' story is often seen as a success, but was it? Would you rather be Catherine of Aragon, who died for her principles, or Anne of Cleves, who lived by compromising them? There is no easy answer. Let us know your choice in the comments. Henry's next choice was a catastrophic return to his old habits. Strategy number 5, the young trophy wife. This was Catherine Howard. A cousin of Anne Boleyn, she was a teenager when she married the aging, obese, and increasingly volatile king. She was vivacious, beautiful, and tragically naive. She had a history of sexual abuse before she came to court, and she continued to have relationships with men her own age after she married Henry. It was only a matter of time before she was caught. When the accusations of her infidelity reached Henry, his reaction was terrifying. He did not just rage, he wept. He wallowed in self-pity. He played the victim. And then he unleashed his vengeance. Catherine was subjected to brutal interrogations. She was imprisoned in the Tower, where she reportedly descended into madness. She was forced to watch as her lovers were tortured and executed. Their heads were placed on spikes on London Bridge, so that she would see them on her final journey to the executioner's block. She was beheaded in 1542, probably no older than 19. Her last words were a confession of her guilt and a prayer for the king. Finally, we have strategy number 6, the companion and nurse. This was Catherine Parr. A mature, intelligent, and twice widowed woman, She was more of a nurse than a wife to the ailing king. She was a kind stepmother to Henry's children and a respected intellectual in her own right. Her strategy was to be a calming, stabilizing presence in the king's final years. But even she was not safe. Her interest in the Protestant Reformation aroused the suspicion of conservative factions at court. They convinced Henry that she was a heretic. A warrant was issued for her arrest. She was to be taken to the Tower, interrogated, and almost certainly executed. But she was warned. She went to Henry, and in a masterful performance of submission, she begged for his forgiveness, claiming that she had only debated religion with him to distract him from his pain. He forgave her. She survived, but only just. 6 wives, 6 strategies, 6 failures. Catherine of Aragon was too proud. Anne Boleyn was too ambitious. Jane Seymour was too disposable. Anne of Cleves was too ugly. Catherine Howard was too young. Catherine Parr was too smart. Do you see the pattern? It didn't matter what they did. The problem wasn't them. The problem was him. So why wouldn't you survive being married to Henry VIII? Because there was no way to win. It was a game rigged from the start. A game in which the only rule was the king's will, and the only prize for losing was a quick death. What does this story teach us about the nature of power and the dangers of tying your fate to a tyrant? Leave your final thoughts in the comments. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of Tudor darkness. Our next investigation will take us to the cruelest punishment that made people beg for death. If you want to continue to challenge the sanitized versions of history we've been taught, subscribe to Dark Chronicles, because the truth is always more terrifying than the rhyme.